went backpacking a couple days ago, so that's what's on my mind. I thought I would share what I have discovered and created and really enjoyed using when you need to hang your food up in a tree to keep it away from bears. I discovered this method while reading on Andrew Skurka's website, where he tries to make the case for using an Ursack, which is basically a Kevlar bag that you don't have to try and throw up into a tree. And he makes what I think is a good argument, which is throwing a line up into a tree and getting your food up into the air is a pain in the butt, and most people aren't doing it right. And so instead of helping people work on a better technique or something like that, he recommends the Ursack, which I think is a totally fine recommendation. I really like Andrew Skurka. I'm not here to debate that. But in the comments, someone talked about using a 2-tree method with a pulley. And they recommended this pulley. It's for marine use. It's a pretty lightweight pulley. And I started experimenting with this technique, and I have found it to be like a total game changer when you're trying to throw a bear bag up into a tree. And so I have 2 systems. This is for group use, this is for single use, although last time no one brought rope, and so we had almost like 30 pounds worth of food for 5 people on this system, and it held up, although I think it was probably getting close to its limit. And so then this is what I take with me in a group. So first, let me just really quick, if it's not already obvious to you why this matters, I'll just show it to you really fast. So they say that when you want to keep your food away from a bear, you need to find a limb that goes out something like that, and you throw a line up like this, and then you hang your food. And there's different ideas out there of like what this distance is supposed to be, something like 10 feet, maybe 15. And then the bag is supposed to be 5 feet from the tree. And then you also want it like 5 feet from the tree in this direction. And what they almost never say in those videos is how hard it is to find a tree that does that. Some of the more detailed explanations say that this branch needs to be thick enough that if the bear goes to walk on it, it won't crack. Like basically that he can't break it down. I'm sorry, I misspoke. It needs to be thick enough that he can't just put his foot on it and crack it, but not so thick that he can't walk out there and pull it up. So there's a lot of debate on how much this is necessary and what bears are really capable of. And of course, there's some really good YouTube videos about bears doing all sorts of crazy things. But what I really want to just argue is that it's really hard to find a tree that meets that criteria. And if you consider the additional criteria of it's supposed to be a certain distance away from your camp, and it's supposed to be in a certain direction, upwind or downwind, all of that, you can spend a really long time trying to find a tree. The other thing is, if you get into camp after you've been hiking, you probably want to get your tent or your hammock set up. You might want to get a fire going. You might want to get some food going. And putting up your food for the bear bag ends up being one of the last things you do. At least that's been my experience, not only personally, but observing others. And by that time you're tired and it's dark and you tend to get a little lazy and fatigued. And so you compromise and you find not so good of trees. And anyway, the other thing is throwing a rope up onto these branches is harder than you might think. You miss a lot, your line goes flying a lot. If you've tied a rope to a rock, it can be dangerous. I've seen the rocks come back down and almost hit me or my kids. And so I've probably put my food in a tree 40 times, and most of the times have been pretty stressful. And the system I'm about to show you, which is not my invention, although I adapted it on my own, I did one thing that I think is interesting that I haven't seen anybody else do. It really reduces the amount of time and reduces the amount of stress. So I use what's called a 2-tree method. And so instead of looking for that specific branch, you really just have to find 2 trees that are reasonably spaced out away from one another. Now, the really great advantage of this technique is that you don't need big, thick branches for the rope to hold the weight of your food. That's the other thing is, if you have rope that's going over a tree with bark, as you pull down on this rope and you pull up 5, 10, 15 pounds worth of food, you're putting a relatively high amount of force on this branch. And because the rope is really frictiony and dragging on the bark, you'll find that these limbs begin to bend. And I've actually broken one before and the whole thing's come down on me. So the 2-tree method, the nice thing is you don't need very thick branches. In fact, they can be really small little stubs. And what you do is you take one line and you throw it up and over this branch down like that. Or up and over this branch like that. And it just has to sit right in the crotch. And the thing is, even relatively small diameter branches, they're pretty strong right here at the V. And then you do the same on the other side. And in the middle you have a pulley. Then you pull these 2 lines to you and you kind of pull them until this thing rises up in the air and is basically taut across the top. Okay, so this goes up here like that. And then you take this line and tie them off somewhere. Sometimes they can tie them off to each other and then off to a branch or something like that, but you tie them off. And then you have this pulley that's up here in the air, and then you have a 3rd line coming down where you attach your food on one side, and then on the other side you pull it down. So now let me show you what that looks like kind of in real life. So this is a very special line. It's made out of Spectra, super strong, but what's more interesting is it's super slick. This is actually known as like arborist line or arborist throwing line. And basically, if someone's gonna get into a tree with a chainsaw, they'll use a line like this, they'll throw weight up into the tree, and then they'll use it to feed a bigger, thicker climbing line up. Anyway, it's super slick. You gotta be a little bit careful with your knots because they don't wanna hold as much, but it's really slick, and so it runs up and over the branches really easily. So you would throw this line to one tree, this line to another tree, and the pulley sits in the middle. And then I'm a bit of a rope nerd. I wanted to try out some Kevlar rope. So this is some Kevlar rope, which they use, I guess, in the kite industry, if that's such a thing. Anyway, you loop this through your pulley. And one really good lesson learned is have a carabiner at one end and a loop at another and loop them. And the reason you want to do that is if you don't do that, what will happen is at some point, the weight of the carabiner will pull this all the way to the top where you can't reach it anymore because it's 20 feet in the air and you have to redo the whole system, or the carabiner will go to the top and you're holding this. So you always want to loop them that way. Regardless of where it is, you can always pull the whole system all the way to the left or all the way to the right because it's a big loop. And then when you're ready to hang your bag, you put that on, whatever bag you keep all of your food in, and then you just pull that down till this goes all the way to the top. And then you tie this off somewhere. And I've put probably 30 or 40 pounds on this pulley before for large groups. It works great. It's silky smooth. You're not rubbing your rope on branches. And it just works really, really well. So this is essentially a copied system. Somebody told me exactly where to buy this on Andrew Skurcz's website. I use some Kevlar rope for this, and I use some Spectra rope for that. Not really because it's needed, but because I was experimenting with these ropes and strings and materials, and I thought, well, this is a good application. Okay, the slightly innovative thing that I did on my own was instead of a pulley to save weight, I used this polished chrome ring, which I had bought for a leather working project. And it's slippery enough, it works like a pulley, a less complicated pulley. I use braided mason line that you can get from Home Depot. Don't buy the twisted stuff, buy the braided. Twisted sucks. And I have, on both of these, I have about 30 feet for each of these ropes. So this rope is 30, this rope is 30, and this one is also 30. And I have not run across trees that I've not been in a situation where I've had trouble. Most of the time I have too much. It's actually more than you need, but I would say if you're not sure and you don't want to risk it, start with 30 or 40, and then after you've gone a few times and you get a feel for it, then trim it back if you want to. In this case, I used one of these little carabiners. You can get them on Amazon. I saw them first at Mountain Laurel Designs. They're kind of expensive over there, and they're pretty cheap on Amazon. And I forget what they're rated for, maybe 25 pounds, but they're sufficiently robust for this. And this is some accessory cord I got in Minnesota in the Boundary Waters, and I can't tell you much about it. But this is another example. You want to keep a carabiner at one end, and you want to keep a little loop at the other end, because if not, you'll basically find that once the pulley's up in the air, you'll have a line, but you'll have no way to reach up there and pull the line back down. So I'm going to cut now to my backyard, and I'm going to show you this thing in action. And I was trying to figure out the best way to film this, but I thought some time up here on the bench was best, and then some time out there. The last thing is, the way you get your stuff up in the air is you take a bag that you keep the kit in, you fill it with rocks, or I don't know, normally rocks, and you basically have a weight, and you throw that up there, and then it comes down the other side. Last thing I'll show is just the weight. So this system weighs, we'll do ounces, I'm not a big grams guy. So this system weighs 1.5 ounces. And my bigger group system without the little bag that it goes in weighs 3 ounces. So they're very light, they're very effective, they're very cheap, and of course you can buy a product that makes your life a little bit easier, like an Ursac, but I prefer to up my skill game, whether it's knots or anything like that, instead of relying on a simplified product. So I'm gonna cut to the woods now. I'll show you how it works. All right, so we're here in my backyard. I've selected 2 trees. This one to the right here has a Y that I'm gonna try and throw through. And this one on the left has a lot of smaller branches, but again, I want to illustrate the beauty of, you don't need a very big branch coming out, because you're just going to throw it right through where the branch meets the tree, and that area is always very strong, even if the branch is only 1 inch in diameter. So I already have my cord on the ground there. I have all 3 lines already unbundled. I have my small mesh bag that holds rocks that I've collected, already tied with a bowline to the left tree line. So I'm going to throw the left tree line up and over, and then either secure it or hang on to it, move the bag of rocks from the left tree line to the right tree line, throw that up and over, and then I will pull on the left and the right to pull the pulley up between the trees and center it and secure it. And then you'll see I brought some a simulated food bag, a bunch of about 5 pounds worth of dog food to pull up and show you how that works. All right, here we go. That's a miss. Try it again. This is where it's important to have a heavy enough food bag, a heavy enough throw bag, that if it gets caught in some stuff, the line still comes down. Now, it's not exactly where I was hoping to hit, but I think it'll be enough. You can actually, because you have both sides, you can kind of wiggle it to the base of the branch. Okay, this is not ideal, but it'll work for illustration purposes. If I was out in the backcountry, I would rethrow it, because it's not quite in the crotch where the branch meets the trunk, but it'll be sufficient for testing purposes. So you can hang on to your throw line either by tying it off temporarily or by hanging onto it like this, in your mouth, whatever. The thing is, you have to retie this, because right now it's not at the right tension. So whatever you do, you're doing it temporarily. Okay, now let's get the next one up. yeah, left out. Okay. So now I have my right tree line and my left tree line in my hand. And as I pull, I can move the pulley far to this side, or I can move the pulley far to this side, whatever makes sense for my situation. Then I can tie them off to two separate trees or to the same tree, depending on what trees are around. And I'm just going to do a quick knot because I don't want you to have to watch this long video of me tying knots off. But basically you tie it off to a tree. All right, I have about 5 pounds worth of dog food here, just to simulate a food load. Now, this is very important. If you don't tie these two to each other like I did temporarily, then what can happen is the carabiner may be so high that you can't reach it, and there's no good way to bring it back down because it's not heavy enough. So that's why you need to have both lines, that way you can adjust it. So put my carabiner on my food load. And then you take this and tie it off. Now, I don't know how well the video showed up. My line started to slip a little bit on the left side because I didn't want to redo that throw because I didn't want you to have to watch that, and I didn't want to edit it and leave you wondering how long this really took, but this took 5 minutes. Now, I probably would have rethrown the one on the left because it's not quite in the crotch of the tree, and I would have taken a few more moments to tie that line off a little bit more securely, but you can see that I'm up in the air with 5 pounds of food, which is more than I would have brought on a solo trip anyway. It's very secure, it's very light, it's very easy to raise and lower this. If you've ever done this before, you know how what I'm doing right now is not possible with a branch because there's so much friction from the rope to the load that it's really not easy, especially if you have a lightweight food bag, you're near the end of the trip and you only have half a pound or a pound. The friction between the branch and the rope is so strong or so high that it damages your rope, or it doesn't want to come down unless you give this thing like a bit of a whip to release the friction. And again, with the two-tree system, you can manipulate the left line and the right line to put the pulley anywhere you want, closer to the one tree or to the other tree, whatever you like. So this is only an illustration. Obviously, I would redo a little bit of this on the left-hand tree because that branch is already starting to bend and move. But for illustration purposes, I'm trying to keep this video short. And I also wanted to do it in one continuous scene so that you know how long it can take. So one thing you want to look out for is keeping your strings from getting tangled on the ground. And when you're throwing them, you want to make sure that they're not going to suck up a bunch of branches and get tangled on the way up. And if you're doing this and you're finding it frustrating, join the club. This is one of those things that is easier said than done. It's also one of those things that is easily illustrated on YouTube with pen and paper. But when you go out in the wilderness and it's dusk or worse, night, you're using a headlamp and you're looking for suitable trees and you're throwing lines that are getting tangled with twigs and brush and thorns at your feet, it's a very frustrating process. And if you want to spend $90 and you want to buy an earth sack and that fits for your needs, go right ahead. But if you want something lighter and cheaper and actually moves your food out of range of bears, and you're willing to put in a little time and practice and up your skill game, then I hope this video was instructive for you. And yeah, if you didn't like it, let me know by giving me a thumbs down. And go check out Andrew Skirker's website. He talks a lot about the Ursack, and in general, you can learn a lot from him in way of camping. All right, folks, take care. Have a good one.